I want you to look at something the next time you walk through an old city. Look at the ground level windows on buildings from the 1800s. You'll notice something strange. They're half buried. What should be first floor windows are now at shin level, sitting below the modern sidewalk. Basement windows that peek out just above the pavement. Doors that open onto staircases, going down before they go up. This isn't in one city, it's everywhere. Boston, New York, London, Moscow, Seattle, San Francisco. All across North America and Europe, we've got these orphaned half windows staring up from under our feet. The standard explanation? The streets were raised over time, gradual urban development. Layers of cobblestones and asphalt built up across decades. Sounds reasonable until you start measuring. We're not talking about a few inches of settling. We're talking 8 feet, 10 feet. Sometimes an entire story buried beneath the current street level, and it happened in a single generation. So here's what I've been digging into, and I mean that literally. There's a phenomenon called the mud flood, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Buildings that were clearly designed with their main entrance at ground level, now half swallowed by earth. Structures that had massive windows for first floor storefronts, now bricked over or converted into cellar access. The timeline doesn't work. The explanations don't work. And the photographs from the mid-1800s show us exactly what happened. The ground level rose, fast, uniformly, across entire continents. That's not how cities develop naturally. That's something else. The official story goes like this. Cities raised their street levels to improve drainage and sanitation in the late 1800s. Seattle, for example, supposedly raised its streets after a fire in 1889 to fix flooding problems from high tides. San Francisco did something similar. Chicago raised the entire downtown. Sounds like good urban planning, right? Except when you look at the scale and speed, none of it makes sense. In Seattle, they tell you the streets were raised 8 to 12 feet across dozens of blocks. They built retaining walls, filled in the gaps with dirt, and paved over the old ground level. All of this happened within a few years, while businesses on those streets stayed open. People just kept using the old first floors as basements. Here's the problem. The buildings themselves were already there. These weren't new constructions designed for raised streets. These were fully finished structures, ornate facades, grand entrances, massive display windows at what was clearly meant to be street level. You're telling me they built these beautiful buildings, then immediately decided to bury the most expensive, decorative part of them underground? Look at the windows. They're full-size, double-hung windows with detailed masonry surrounds. Those weren't designed to be basement windows. They were meant to let light into ground floor rooms. But now they're below the sidewalk, bricked over or covered with metal grates. Nobody designs a building like that on purpose. And here's the thing that really doesn't track: the timeline. Most of these cities claim they raised their streets between 1870 and 1900. But photographs from the 1850s and 1860s already show some buildings with buried first floors. Already. Before the supposed street-raising projects even began. How do you explain that? How do you explain the same phenomenon showing up in cities that have no record of intentionally raising their streets at all? Let me show you what survived. There are photographs from the 1860s and 1870s showing entire streets covered in mud and debris, sometimes several feet deep. Not flooding, not a temporary mess. The kind of mud that stays, the kind that hardens and becomes the new ground level. In San Francisco, there are images of horse-drawn carriages moving through streets where the mud comes up to the wheel hubs. Buildings in the background show doors that open 5 feet above the mud line, with temporary wooden stairs built up to them. This is after the mud has already been partially cleared. Then you've got the basements. Go into the basement of any old building in a major American city, and you'll find something disturbing. Finished walls, decorative plasterwork, tiled floors, crown molding. These aren't rough-hewn cellars. These are rooms that were meant to be seen. I've walked through basements in Boston where the ceiling height is 10 feet, with ornate tin ceilings and large windows that are now entirely below grade. That's not a basement, that's a first floor that got buried. Seattle has an entire underground city, original sidewalks and storefronts that are now one level below the current street. They give tours. You can walk through them. They call it the Seattle Underground, and they frame it as the remnants of the old city before the street raising. But when you're down there, you see these weren't back alley spaces. These were prime real estate. Wide sidewalks, large glass windows, fancy tile work. This was the main commercial district. Why would you bury it? The maps tell the same story. If you compare city maps from the 1850s to maps from the 1880s, the elevations don't match. Streets that were listed as being at one elevation are suddenly 8 or 10 feet higher, with no notation explaining the change. Buildings that were on flat ground are suddenly on a slope. Waterfront areas that were at sea level are now well above it. The geography changed, and nobody wrote down why. If the ground level rose that quickly across that many cities in the same 30-year window, then we're not looking at urban planning. We're looking at an event. Something deposited a massive amount of sediment across the northern hemisphere in the mid-1800s. Mud, ash, soil, call it what you want. It settled into valleys, filled in low-lying areas, and buried the ground floors of everything that was already standing. This lines up with the Tartarian timeline. If there was a global civilization with advanced infrastructure that was destroyed or displaced in the early 1800s, then the mud flood is the reset mechanism. It's what covered the evidence. The buildings that survived were the tallest, the most durable. The ones built with that old-world megalithic construction we see in the cathedrals and city halls and train stations. The ones built to last 1,000 years, but even those got partially buried. Their grand entrances became basements. Their first floors became foundations. Here's what really makes you think. The newspapers from that era barely mention it. You'll find scattered references to street improvements or grade adjustments, but no contemporary accounts of the enormous engineering projects that would have been required to raise entire city grids by 10 feet. No records of where all that filled dirt came from. No complaints from business owners about losing their storefronts. It's like it just happened, and everyone accepted it as normal. Or, and this is the part that keeps me up at night, everyone who remembered the before times was already gone. The people moving into these cities in the 1860s and 1870s didn't build them. They inherited them. They found them like this, partially buried, and they adapted. They turned ground floors into basements, built new entrances at the new street level, and told themselves a story about urban planning to make sense of it, because the alternative was too big to process. So where does that leave us? Next time you walk past an old building, stop and look. Count the windows from the top down. Notice where the architectural detail starts getting simpler, less ornate. That's usually right around the modern ground level. Now imagine what's below it. Imagine an entire story of rooms, hallways, decorative stonework, all packed in with dirt and forgotten. That's not renovation, that's burial. The thing about the mud flood is that once you see it, the evidence is everywhere. It's not hidden, it's just been reframed. We've been told it's progress, development, improvement, but you can't improve a building by burying it. You can't upgrade a city by erasing its first floor. This was damage control. This was adapting to a world that had fundamentally changed. And the fact that it happened globally, all at once in the same narrow window of time, that's not coincidence. That's a timeline. I'm not saying I know exactly what caused it, whether it was environmental catastrophe, deliberate reset, or something stranger. But I am saying the buildings remember, the streets remember. The buried windows are still down there, waiting under the sidewalk, staring up at a sky they were designed to see. We just stopped asking why they're there. Maybe it's time we started asking again.